Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good to be together this morning. How are you? Are you well? Doing okay? Staying cool? How many of you have a swamp cooler? You have a swamp cooler? What's the temperature at which those stop working? Feels about now, by the way. We have a swamp cooler, and it just feels like it's just getting wet in my house, not cool. So I need it to cool down. We'll pray about that at the end. Two quick observations from the announcements. First, did you guys catch Ben's little flex? Like, we just hiked a mountain on a whim. Anybody catch that? Did that bother anybody besides? Okay. And number two, if you're in your 40s and 50s and you wanted to play pickleball, you have two options. One, you can show up and just whoop those youngins. Or two, you can write in, like Ben said, so you can get the age bracket that you can win in. Okay? You can make your own event. Did you catch that? He says, if you're doing something, you can include other people, so you could make your own 40s and 50s, or 50s and 60s pickleball, so you can be a winner. I've been playing in an over 40 basketball league, and I'm suddenly quicker. Like, just instantly, I'm just quicker. It's great. Okay. Well, we're finishing a series today. If you've not been with us, we've been doing this series, Where Did They All Go? We've been looking at the different disciples who become the apostles and where they end up. So there are parts of the scriptures that describe each of these people, but there is some of it we have to find from church history. So like last week, we had three folks that between them had one verse. So it's a little hard to extrapolate other than to look at church history. And if you were here last week, I hardly say anything about two of them. And my daughters, who always like to give me a hard time, when I left church last week, they said, "You know, Dad, you didn't talk about those two guys hardly at all. And that means one day you're going to see them in heaven, and they're going to be upset. You're going to have to talk." And I was like, "That's fair point. I figure by then we'll be in heaven, maybe they'll get over it." But the last one that we'll look at, and then I've kind of added one in, and you'll see why, is Judas Iscariot. When I say Judas Iscariot, what is the one thing you think of? Who is Judas? He's the betrayer, right? That's it, right away. Boom, betrayer. And good reason for that. I mean, actually, many of the texts call him that, Judas the betrayer. So there's a good reason to call him that. But maybe you've not thought through it. I mean, Judas was there for everything before he's the betrayer. Judas is there to see Jesus walk on the water. Judas is there to see the feeding of the 5,000. And actually, what's even stranger to think about is not only does he see the feeding of the 5,000, depending on how you understand that text, Judas is literally participating in the miracles. That means, have you thought about how all the food appears, the feeding of the 5,000? Remember that Jesus takes the bread and he breaks it, and then they pass it out. Where does the miracle happen? There's two ways to see it. One would be Jesus breaks the bread and like bucket loads of fish and bread start falling into piles. Or the miracle literally happens in the hands of the disciples. I think that's probably most likely, because if there was like truckloads of bread falling from the sky, it feels like they would have mentioned that in the text. The miracle, so that means Judas is a person who has seen food multiply, people healed, people walking on water, people raising from the dead with his own eyes. He has seen all of these things, and yet is known as the betrayer. I don't know if you've ever had gaps of time in between seeing somebody and noticed that they've changed. There's people of a certain age here. Has anybody been to your high school reunion? Anybody been to that? Most of you are avoiding it. Okay, but if you go, I haven't gone, to be fair, but I still have friends from high school, and they send the pictures of people, and you're like, oh no, what happened to him? There's two of him. now. Or what happened to her? Like her face looks like it's like curled in on itself. But then there's other people that like, you know, they seem kind of sad and like discouraged, and they're like totally different people. Like the people that you weren't sure you would see again are like totally alive. What we do know about people is they change. People do change over time. And they change not just from the circumstances around them, but from the decisions that they make with their own life. I mean, the most boring way of thinking is just like your body. Your body does change. Here's a little tip if you didn't know. Don't learn anything at church. Depending on what you eat and how you move, your body changes. Did you know that? Quick tip, okay? But it's in the same way that your body changes, so can your heart. So can your character. And most major changes in your body don't happen instantly. There is plastic surgery, and there are TikTok influencers that would tell you otherwise. But in the real world, change happens very slowly, a meal at a time, a day at a time, an hour at a time. Small decisions you make over time change who you become, and this is for the positive and for the negative. What I think we see in Judas, who we know to be later the betrayer, is someone who makes a series of small decisions that lead him into a very dark place over time. It's very rare that someone just wakes up and decides to do something terrible. I don't know anyone who said something like this: okay, I have a plan to become an addict. It's going to take work, but if I stay focused, in 1 year from now, my entire will can be taken from me because of a substance. Anybody, you know anybody that makes that plan? If I stay focused, I stay dedicated, I keep drinking enough, I'm going to make it. Do you know anyone like that? Some of you are like, I don't know, my Uncle Joe seems a little like, but you might know it seems like that. Nobody does that. But many people slide into addiction. Nobody decides they're going to be bitter. Nobody thinks they'll be a betrayer. Nobody thinks to themselves, I bet you I could become like one of these famous betrayal guys, like Judas. And yet, many experience betrayal in their life. Friends, family, coworkers. Nobody plans to be that person, but many become that person. So when you look at Judas, you see some of the anatomy of how you become a betrayer. He's described this way very directly. John chapter 6 is a fascinating verse. John chapter 6, verses 70 and 71. This is what the text says. This is Jesus speaking. He says, "Did I not choose you, the 12, yet one of you is the devil." He meant Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, who was the one of the 12 who would later betray him. Okay, so the context of this is they had just done the feeding of the 5,000. And Jesus looks at the crowd and he says, here's the truth. The miracles are interesting, but that's not what's really interesting. The miracles are pointing to me. You think that what you want is another miracle, but what you really need is me. I'm the one who makes a way for you. I'm the one. And so then he says really, really clearly, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can have nothing to do with me. Whole bunch of people coming looking for a miracle. They see a miracle, so what do they want? They want another miracle. And then Jesus just says, listen, the miracles are all supposed to point to me. Eat my flesh, drink my blood. There's a huge crowd, and the crowd starts to walk away. Now, before we're too hard on the crowd, we should maybe acknowledge that if anyone asks you to participate in cannibalism, you should leave. Quick tip. Somebody's like, you should eat part of my body and drink part of my blood. My cue to leave, Okay, another quick tip for you. A lot of hot tips today, church. And they leave. And Jesus turns and looks at the 12 and says, are you too going to leave? And I think that what we get here in John 6 is one of the most pure confessions of faith in all of the Bible. Peter says, to whom shall we go? You have the words of everlasting life. Peter doesn't say, Jesus, don't worry. We know that you're not actually asking for cannibalism. We know that when you say, eat my flesh and drink my blood, you're referring to the Exodus in a certain way, and the way that food was prepared in the desert by way of manna every day. And you are just the type of the Old Testament picture of this. And you're also the type of the Old Testament picture of the sacrifice, that the blood is poured out for the sake of our sins. We know that that's an Old Testament type, and really we know that for the rest of time, after you die and raise again, we will take bread and cup as a remembrance of your death and your resurrection. We're not actually going to eat your body. We're going to eat like it's remembrance of what you've done and declaring what you've done for us. Don't worry, we understand all of this. That's why we're sticking around. Peter does not say that because Peter has no idea what the heck is going on. So instead what Peter says is, I don't know what you just said, but you have the words of eternal life. So I'm sticking with you. You would think that at that moment Jesus would turn and say, good job, Peter. You guys are great. Let's do the next thing. Instead, he turns and says, one of you is the devil. Let's go. And then they walk away. And all of them go, okay. Why? Because Jesus is reminding them of what the point of the passage is, and it's this. Lots of people come looking for signs, but until you realize that the signs are actually just to come to him, all you're going to do is keep asking for more miracles. All you're going to do is keep saying, God, give me this so I can get that. I need one more thing so that my life can be different. I need one more answer so that it makes sense. I need one more way for you to come through for me, and then I can trust you. And Jesus says there's at some point where it's like, listen, you got to make a call. Are you just coming to me so you can just keep getting stuff from me? Or do you want a life with me? Peter makes the right declaration. He says, that's the right thought. The right thought is you don't have to even understand everything, but eventually you got to just come to me. You follow me. But there's one of you that I can tell already, they've decided not to. They've decided the minute that I stop being Santa Claus is the minute they're going to stop following me. The minute I stop just doing magic tricks for them is the minute that they're going to do something else. The minute it gets hard is the same minute that they're just going to bail, because all of this was just so that you can come to me. And this gets revealed in Judas's heart in very particular ways. In John chapter 12, there's this beautiful story where Jesus knows he's headed to the cross. He's sitting around with his guys. It's right after in John's gospel John has told us he's going to the cross. And he's sitting around at this banquet, which they know is kind of towards the end. And a woman breaks in, and she breaks this jar of perfume and anoints Jesus' head and his feet. And the verse says that the fragrance filled the house. And Judas gets mad. John chapter 12, verse 4, it says, but one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It's worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to it and what was put into it. Judas is the one who's managing the money, and he's skimming bits of the money off for himself, and he's mad because he says, this woman did this act of worship, but why would you do that act of worship? That's worth a lot of money. I could have got that money, and I could have spent that money differently. And really, John says, he wasn't really looking to spend the money. He was looking to take some of the money. Have you ever just noticed that one of the slides of your heart can be greed? That no matter how much you have, you always want a little bit more? Should we all just show our Amazon accounts to each other? Should we just do it? Should we? Maybe that would be like a way of confession. Like we just all show our Amazon accounts. Like, here's what I've ordered in the last 90 days. And then if you really want to go deep, you look at anything you save for later. That's when the real truth comes out. Like, you know, I knew this was a little bit of a stretch, but I really want this. But especially those of us who are married here, I know my wife's going to ask about this one. So I'm going to just save that one for later, for when she seems at her weakest. And that's when I'll get, no, just me? Okay, so this is the real world. The real world is you and I live, I mean, just think about how crazy it is. We live in a world that you could order literally anything and it just arrives at your house. How dangerous is that? You just get anything. Like anything you could just think of right now, you can pretty much get, and they'll just bring it to your house, maybe by today. You don't even have to go to the store. And yet, there's probably not a single one of us in this room that has not had a judgmental thought about how someone else spends money. Like, why are they doing that? Couldn't that money be better spent on da-da-da? Don't look at my Amazon cart. But you obviously need to think more about how you spend your money. That's the power of greed. The power of greed is only broken with generosity. I know there's some of you in the room that you're like, no, the power of greed is managed with better budgeting. No, it's not. The power of greed is only broken through generosity. The reason Judas brings this up there is because he hates how generous this woman has been. Who is he to tell her that she can't be generous? What makes him think, I know that's your perfume, and you want to spend it in worship, but I think maybe we should get some of that. Who is she to challenge someone else's generosity? What does he think he's doing? It's because his own sin is being revealed. One of the ways he's hardening is he's still trying to figure out how does he get what he wants, and now he's found a way to spiritualize it. He's spiritualizing, he's instrumentalizing his own needs, his own desires, and his own wants, and he's spiritualizing them as though they're for the poor. Can you imagine a world where people would make like church about themselves? Isn't that a crazy thought? Like, it's a crazy thought, isn't it, to think that you could make a spiritual experience that people have with one another about yourself. Not about what you give away, not about what other people are giving away. And imagine a world where people, I know this is the craziest, stretch your mind, where people judge each other in church. We judge other people's generosity. We decide what they can and can't do and what they should and shouldn't do with their own money. And when they're generous, we find that like somehow offensive or strange. Can you imagine that? Anyway, nobody's laughing. That's funny. That's actually pretty funny. Like, you should be able to imagine that because it's like everywhere. Actually, it's not everywhere. It's in here. See, this is what makes the story of Judas so terrifying, is there's a little bit of Judas in all of us. None of us think, oh, I'm the betrayer. None of us think, oh, I'm the judgmental one, until you actually start to break down what's going on here. That subtle move toward it's about me. It's about what I want and what I need. And I need God to do what I need for me, that begins to twist us on the inside. It isn't instant, but over time, slowly, we become another kind of person. Because we just keep turning inwardly. If we're not making choices to worship, be generous, etc. Well, of course, this moves on to some different forms of disillusionment in him. I imagine he, like many of the disciples, begins to realize Jesus isn't going to do what he wants him to do. He isn't going to make the life he wants him to make. Most of the disciples, as far as we can tell, had joined Jesus because he thought he was going to lead some kind of revolution, which he technically did, but not the way they wanted. They thought he was going to kick the Romans out. It gets worse and worse until finally the Last Supper, John chapter 13. I'll read in verse 21. After he'd said this, Jesus was very troubled in spirit and testified, "Very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me." His disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Do you know who that is? That's John. So I just want you to think about how John calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. That's so awesome. He doesn't say his own name. He's like, the one he loved. I love it. And P.S., may that be true of each of us. May that be true of you. That one of the primary ways you know yourself in the world is I'm one of those he loves. It's me. Wouldn't that be great? People are like, tell me a little bit about yourself. Okay, I've got a secret. I've come to believe that Jesus is crazy about me. He loves me. I'm one that he loves. I also play golf, and I like chicken wings. So, whatever. But like the way, which are all true about me, by the way. But you introduce yourself in that. Can you imagine how many counseling appointments are saved if that we know that's true? Can you imagine how much conflict is resolved if we know that's true? By the way, it is true. The question is, do you know it's true? So he says, the disciple whom Jesus loved was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to the disciple and said, ask him which one he means. I love the way, I just love how honest the text is. Peter's like, you ask him. Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it's the one to whom I will give the piece of bread when I've dipped it in the dish. Dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered him. So Jesus told him, what you're about to do, do quickly. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, and some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the festival or to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. Jesus points him out. I don't have time to read the text, but if you want to read Matthew chapter 27, verses 3 to 10 for the 5 of you taking notes, it describes Judas going and selling out Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He realizes what he's done, and he goes back and says, take the silver back. I'm so sorry. I've shed innocent blood. And the folks in the temple say, too bad. You already made your deal. He throws the money over. Some of you know the story. And it says, and he goes and he hangs himself. What we realize about Judas is he realizes he messed up. Part of living is realizing you mess up. Any of you messed up this week? Check your pulse real quick. If you have one of those, then the answer to that question is yes. Yes. Okay, so some of you have messed up like in some silly ways, like you took the wrong road and you got stuck in traffic, or you forgot to do the dishes, or you promised your wife yet again the one house project and you didn't do it, and or you said you would get your kids at a certain time and you weren't there on time, right? Those are little things you can get over. Some spouses right now are like, not so little, but there's those are little things. But this is a big one. Have you ever had a big one? A big one. Like, I lost that relationship and I don't think that one's coming back. I messed this thing up with my kid. I don't know how I'm going to repair that one. I don't know if it can be repaired. It would depend on them. Got fired from this job. There's no going back. That's done now. That's the kind of mistake Judas, Jesus is dead now. That's on me. I did that. There's no going back. Except there is going back. See, even when you've made the biggest mistake ever, you can always go back. See, Judas has a real sense of remorse. He feels bad, but he still lacks the courage for repentance. He quite literally goes and takes his own life instead of turning back to the brothers and even turning back to Jesus. Judas is generally put up against Peter, right? Because Peter also denies Christ, right? He denies him 3 times. The difference is Peter doesn't go kill himself and eventually returns to Jesus. And here's the craziest part of that story. Peter becomes the head of the church. I mean, that's wild. So the guy that is brash and insane, who rejects Jesus, turns back to Jesus and becomes one of the key leaders in the church, Peter. It's amazing, isn't it? Judas, however, doesn't turn back, takes his own life. And then here's what's wild. Who's the next biggest leader that you're aware of in the New Testament? Maybe let me say it this way. Who writes the majority of the New Testament? Paul. Paul, like Peter, is a disaster. He's brilliant. He's a strong religious leader. Paul is going around in the early church killing Christians, chasing them down city to city and killing them because he is such a zealous guy. He's like, I'm going to do the right thing for God. He's killing them. And then Paul has an encounter with God, and he becomes one of the apostles. If you want the nerds among us, I'll give you an interesting theological quandary. After Judas hangs himself in Acts chapter 1, they appoint a new guy to take Judas's place, a guy named Matthias. I'm not talking about Matthias because I don't know this for sure, and don't be mad at me if you like Matthias. I'm not convinced Matthias should have been the 12th apostle. I think in Acts chapter 1, the early church decides to replace him by casting lots, when actually they were commanded to wait for the Holy Spirit. They did a thing in between because they got nervous. They're like, there's a guy missing on the team. How are we going to win with an 11-man roster? Jesus had told them to wait for the Holy Spirit, and it would be of my boring, simple opinion that actually God had prepared and was preparing Saul, who becomes Paul, to be the 12th apostle. God had picked Paul, and they picked another guy. Again, this is another one where I'll see Matthias in heaven. He'll be like, hey. But I'm just saying, I think, hey, about that one sermon. Okay, man, listen, I don't know. I read a bunch of people. That's what they said. Okay, go take it up with them. But I think there's a decent case to be made that Paul was actually supposed to replace Judas, which, by the way, if that's true, is all the more interesting and powerful. Because it means you have a guy who's quite literally going out there killing people that God grabs a hold of, and he yields, and he takes the place of another betrayer as a betrayer. The difference is he received the grace of God. The text that we read is Paul writing in 1 Corinthians 15. He describes how Jesus showed himself to everybody, including him. Paul describes himself as an apostle, but also describes himself as the least of the apostles. He describes himself as a murderer. He says, I was a murderer, but God showed his unending grace that he grabbed a hold of me. Listen, betrayal doesn't have to be the end. You can always come back to Jesus. The mercy of God is always present for you. The love of God is always present for you. The story of Judas is a terrifying reminder that you can walk really close to Jesus and yet also have your heart be hardening. The story of Judas is a terrible reminder that bitterness can seep in such a way that if you don't tend to it, you don't work on your forgiveness and your greed and your sort of like desperate need for God to just do what you want him to do, that stuff will eventually harden you in a way that there will be a big moment of reckoning. But even in that moment of reckoning, there is always mercy. I mean, can you imagine today us accepting a leader who had murdered people? In our current kind of cancel culture, like, you murdered a bunch of people, you're out. You're out. But Paul actually becomes the Apostle Paul, the guy who writes the majority of the New Testament, because he's willing to humble himself and say, yeah, I was that, but now I'm known as this by the mercy and the grace of God. Some of you right now are like, I wouldn't take Paul. Okay, but the Lord did. Jesus accepted him, and he became this incredible leader. He replaces Judas, betrayer for betrayer, but he turned toward the mercy of God. This is a big room. There's people in this room that have been betrayed and have betrayed. In this room, there are people that are addicted. There are some of you in this room that yeah, my heart has hardened over time. I can feel it. When you're saying that, I know that's me. Instead of going and trying way harder, why don't you just throw yourself on the mercy of God today? The gospel of Jesus Christ is this, that we are not good enough to reach to God, but he did everything in Jesus to reach to us. Every single person around you is a moron. They all make mistakes. They're all stupid. I know they look good because they're in church. They're not. Just talk to people who know them. They're all messed up. Every single person in this room is messed up. The only thing that separates people is if they've responded to the mercy of God. It is not goodness and badness. It's humility versus pride. And will you humble yourself and receive the grace of God? Or will you allow your despair to destroy you? I think in a room this size, there's got to be people that have even despaired unto death. There's people in this room that maybe even today, like this day, you're wondering, maybe I should just end it. And I want to be crystal clear. The God of the universe loves you. And there is always hope in Jesus. There is nothing you can do that can separate you from the love of God. He has come for you in Jesus Christ. Yield and throw yourself on his mercy. Do not take your own life. Surrender to the love of Jesus Christ. That's an extreme version. But there's lesser versions where you just withdraw. You separate. You shut down. Don't allow the brokenness of this world or your own mistakes or other people's mistakes to separate you from God. Can we stand together?